My house is on the very edge of the town, where the streets no longer have names, and the trees have bent down, as if in homage to something long lost. Rarely does anyone pass by here. Silence is my most faithful companion. The old wooden porch creaks when I go out into the fresh air in the morning. The neighbors no longer greet me, not out of anger, just I have ceased to exist in their field of vision. Once my house was full of laughter, the aromas of coffee, and the chatter of grandchildren. Now there is a cold. Not physical, but the other kind that penetrates the very bones, memories, and heart. Walls do not age as quickly as a person ages when they stop being listened to. I have 2 children. Oleg is an IT specialist, big money, huge apartment in the capital. Katya is a marketer, interviews on television, subscribers, successful projects. And not a single call for a week. Sometimes I call myself, but I hear a familiar voice, "Dad, I can't right now, I'll call you back later." They don't call. Later never comes. And my grandchildren. Bodon and Lyra. The same ones I carried on my shoulders when I still had strength. Today they look away when I tell them something. As if my stories are the sound of the wind, nothing more. In the store, the saleswoman doesn't greet me. She puts down the change indifferently, without looking. I ask about the bread sale, she answers dryly, without raising her head. In the hospital, a young therapist talks to me as if I were a stiff old wall. Like, "Does your back hurt? What do you want? You're almost 80. I come home and double-lock the door behind me. Not because I'm afraid of thieves, those who really steal wear ties or sit in the kitchen and watch TikTok, calling me retarded. I close myself off from indifference. It's scarier than loneliness. Every morning I make coffee, not because I want to, but because I have to. I drink from the same cup. It has a crack, but I don't care. And so everything around me is cracked. The world is a crack between who I was and who I am seen as. Sometimes I look in the mirror. I see my eyes. They haven't gone out yet. They have a shadow. It was always there, but I muffled it, with work, love, hope. But today the shadow is growing. I feel it like a slight pressure in my chest. I'm not angry yet. But I'm no longer just disappointed. My diary is the only one who listens to me. I don't hide anything in it, neither the days when I want to leave the house and not come back, nor the dreams in which I am young again, strong again. I record observations. Not intentionally. Just automatically. Date. Name. Retort. Look. This is not a plan. For now, it's just a memory. And memory is poison if you keep it inside for too long. I'm not looking for pity. But I want someone to see. To admit, I was. And I am. And I still have a voice. At least for myself. There are nights when I can't sleep. I lie down, listening to the clock ticking against the silence. At such moments, memories roll in like waves. Not warm, icy and bitter. Because every frame from my past is proof of how wrong I was, thinking that all this made sense. Once I was the backbone. Not of a family, of a whole circle of people. Entrepreneurs shook my hand. Bankers asked my opinion. Workers came for advice. I raised a business from the mud, without connections, without shady schemes. I started with scrap metal, dismantled old factories, sold parts for scrap, and then gathered a team, started building. I believed in honest work. There were times when I didn't sleep for 2 days. I got sick, I went against everyone. And I won. Not because of cruelty, but because of principle. My word was worth more than other people's contracts. I built when others stole. I helped when others were pushing. My children grew up in abundance. They didn't know what it was like to sleep on a cement floor. I took them to camps, bought the best. Not out of gratitude, but because I considered it my duty. A father must give more than he had himself. I invested everything in them, time, money, myself. But now I think, maybe that's my mistake. I taught them to fight, But I didn't teach them to remember. I didn't teach them to see old age as an honor, not a burden. They grew up, became strong. But instead of protecting, they simply moved away. I remember the day when they didn't invite me to a family celebration for the first time. They said, "This is an evening for young people. You'll be bored." I lied to myself that I was tired. I stayed home. I sat in the dark. I listened to my children laughing somewhere in another part of town. Without me. I opened the old chest recently. There are documents, photos, notes, drawings. My story. My struggle. Gratitudes, diplomas, newspaper articles. People wrote, "Thank you for your support, we wouldn't have survived without you." And today? They don't even recognize me in the hardware store that I once financed. To them, I'm not a legend. I'm a shadow that's uncomfortably silent when everyone laughs. I remember the war. Not the one on TV, the real one. Where friends died. Where I almost lost my arm. I survived. And then I decided, if fate gave me a second chance, I'll live it with dignity. And I did. But it seems that dignity is not inherited. It fades over time, like a name on a tombstone that no one comes to read. And here I am again sitting in the kitchen, flipping through yellowed photos. In one, I'm with my children, holding their shoulders. I'm smiling. Strong, proud. And next to me is Olya, my wife. She always said, "You are a rock, and we all stand on you." And now the rock has been bypassed. It is outdated. It takes up space. It should be removed. I am not angry. I am just slowly fading away. And with each memory I feel something rotting inside. Not the body but the soul. It is silently decaying from indifference. And the scariest thing is that no one notices it. And I have not disappeared yet. I am still here. My days are like old silent movies. Monotonous, meaningless. Sometimes I forget what day it is. Not because it's old. But because days have lost their meaning. I have a small diary. Olya once gave it to me. To record the important, she said then. Now I write down there what no one will say out loud. Date. Event. Person. Words. Gesture. Look. I don't forget anything. August 14th. I called Artem. Just to ask if he could take me to the hospital. The answer, "Dad, I have an appointment. Let's take a taxi." It's not difficult. I answered, "Okay, I understand." And then I sat for 10 minutes with a pipe in my hand. Not out of anger. Because of emptiness. Once I took him to the doctor with a temperature below 40, through a blizzard, barefoot. And now. Written by Artem. Refusal. 0814. September 2nd. Grandson Sasha came to visit. In passing, he said, "Everything here is like a museum. It smells old." I smiled. He didn't look me in the eye. He put his feet up on a chair, playing something on his phone. I asked, "Maybe tea with honey?" The answer was short, "I don't drink that." He left half an hour later. I watched him. And I saw, he wasn't ashamed. He didn't care. I wrote down, Sasha. Insult. 0209. September 19th. Polyclinic. Q, as usual. I sat down. Room 43. The doctor came out, looked through me. He called 44. "Excuse me, I'm 43. Wait a second." Wait. I waited half an hour. When I came in, he didn't even look up. "What's wrong with you?" "Chest pain, I can't breathe at night." "You're old." "That's normal." "Calm down. I'll prescribe a light sedative." I went out, didn't say anything. My hands were shaking. Not from fear. From humiliation. I wrote down, Doctor. Name, Savchuk. 0919. And I have dozens of such notes. I don't think they understand this. They think that old age is silence. That we don't hear anything. We don't remember. We don't analyze. But I remember every little thing. Every cold look. Every word that cut like a blade. The only one who still called was my neighbor Maria. She's 3 years older than me. She died last month. I was at the funeral. Of all her relatives, only her daughter came. She lasted 15 minutes, and left. I stood there until the end. I wrote down, Maria. Loneliness to the last. That evening, when I returned from the cemetery, I put an empty cup on the table. And I stared at its bottom for a long time. As if I was looking for some kind of answer there. But there was only a reflection of my face. Tired. Old. And very lonely. Something changed in me that day. As if a fireplace that hadn't been lit for a long time had started to smoke inside. There was no heat coming out, only smoke. I couldn't breathe. And I realized, a little more, and I would simply cease to exist. Shake. And no one would even notice. But something in me wouldn't let it disappear. Some small, still living hearth. It didn't warm. But it began to heat the metal inside. Slowly. Painfully. I continued to write. No longer like an old grandfather. But like a person who analyzes. Who prepares. I won't ask. And I won't shout. I will teach them to see. And this will be just the beginning. The day began, as always, with silence. I woke up early, made coffee, opened the window. The wind smelled of wet leaves and gasoline. Autumn here always smells of wilting. But that morning it smelled of something else too, the calm before the storm. I had to go into town. Buy some medicine, some groceries, maybe do some people watching. I wanted to see if anyone else knew how to look, not just walk by. I walked slowly. People passed me by like a stone on the road. Young, beautiful, in a hurry. Their eyes were shiny but empty. No one looked up. No one saw anything but themselves. I went into the pharmacy. A line. 5 people. When it was my turn, the cashier didn't look up. I put down the prescription. We're out of stock. Next week, she replied, already turning to another. I opened my mouth to say something, but stopped. No sense. I wasn't even in this conversation. On the way out, I tripped over the edge of the stairs. A package of groceries fell. Tomatoes rolled down the road, the glass from the can broke. I knelt down, trying to put everything back together. And then I heard, Grandpa, maybe you should lay out a red carpet. Laughter. 2 guys stood nearby, phones in their hands. One was filming. The other was laughing. Oh, look, a blog for pensioners. Their voices were like blades. Sharp, without pity. People around looked, no one came up. No one. I was on my knees. My hands were shaking. The package tore, things fell again. Someone walked by and said, you have to stay home if you can't walk. And that was it. All around was silence, dissolved in other people's footsteps. I didn't feel anger at first. Only cold. A deep, black cold somewhere in my chest. Then, emptiness. And behind it, a strange, almost calm warmth. I got up. Slowly. Without looking back. I simply gathered the remains, put them in my pocket, and walked away. In the shop window I saw my reflection. My face was gray, wrinkled, my eyes were cloudy. But something had changed. There was no longer any humility in my gaze. A different kind of silence had appeared there. Deep, calm, like before a storm. At home I sat down at the table. I opened my diary. I wrote in large letters, October 21st. Street. People. laughter. And below, briefly, the beginning. I didn't cry. The tears had dried up long ago. I just sat and listened to the old clock strike the minutes. Each stroke was like a countdown. It suddenly became clear to me, I had been wrong all my life. I thought that evil was noise, aggression, blood. And it was calm, quiet. Like indifference. I realized that people are not afraid of death. They are afraid of seeing what they have done. And I will teach them to see it. That evening, for the first time, the house was not quiet. The silence came to life. It breathed with me. It had the shape, the weight, the taste of steel. I picked up a pen. Under the old notes, a new section appeared, the game. My life has always been about control. I controlled business, people, risks, even fear. I was the architect of order. But now I have become the architect of chaos. Not emotional, not wild. But precise. A silence that tears from the inside. I opened old notebooks. There were notes from distant times. Names, numbers, situations. Old connections were not erased, they simply fell asleep. But I knew who to find. Dmitry, Lysyyy, is a former analyst. Now he works as a sysadmin at a bank. Iak is a journalist who always wrote, as it should, for a bottle. Petro B is a former private detective. Burnt, drunk, but his memory still holds. I collected everything in one file. Everything you need to know, passwords from my children's social networks. Correspondence from my grandson, in which he asked friends for money, for studies, although he spent it on bets. Artem's old scam, when he wrote off part of Olya's inheritance, and she never found out. The video from the cameras, where my grandson roughly pushed his girlfriend, few people will believe the joke. I didn't start blackmailing. No. It would be too loud. I created a sequence, leaking anonymous information into the right hands. Suspicion was sown. A slight hint in the family chat. Rewritten documents, accidentally, found by the daughter. Old photos sent to the newspaper, for the stories section. And most importantly, mirrors. I made them look at each other. Artem began to suspect Olesya that she wanted to take away part of the inheritance. Olesya, that Artem was again playing old schemes. Sasha, that grandfather knows something, because he is silent and looks for too long. Family dinners were cancelled. There was silence in the chat. The family, which was a successful picture, cracked. But no one could say why exactly. Because I acted like they acted, silently. In the basement of my house, I found an old safe. There were copies of documents I had once signed with the bank. Thanks to them, I was able to stop the sale of shares, which they planned to quietly withdraw without me. I not only regained control. I gave them a sense of who was the center of gravity in the house. At night, I walked around the city. I just walked. And the people passing by began to feel something. Subtle. I was no longer just a grandfather in an overcoat. I became someone else. There was no anger in my eyes. There was silence. But a silence in which you drown. The neighbors began to greet me. At the pharmacy, they finally looked up. At the store, they gave me a package without a word. Did they know? No. But they felt it. The world respects strength. Even if it is invisible. Especially then. I didn't want blood. I didn't want tantrums. I simply made everyone see me without filters. And you know what? This is scarier than any bullet. They don't dare anymore. Not because I raised my hand or called the police, but because in the silence I brought into their lives, their own voices began to echo. When I look at the children now, sometimes the same misunderstanding flashes in their eyes that once existed in my employees, in the francs in bank lines, in the acquaintances I saved from an avalanche of debt, in the end, which existed in all those people who learned to do without a conscience. They understood, but not because I pointed a finger. They understood through the mirror that I put in front of them when no one was looking. And this mirror did not lie. I did not become an avenger in the mass sense. I did not kill, I did not break lives physically. My strength was different: intelligence, patience, and the skill that the years gave me, to see weaknesses and quietly give them a reflection of their mistakes. When people lose their support, it is not always a tragedy. Often, this is the beginning of an epiphany. That's what I worked on. My revenge was pedagogy. I didn't punish, I taught. Strictly, but without shouting. Things changed. The family got scared, then they had conflicts, then they started looking for ways to save what was still possible. They called more often. Not always out of sincerity, sometimes out of forced politeness. Alessia cried into the phone one evening and apologized for calling me an old junkie at a party. Artem asked for advice, and I gave it coldly, like a doctor making a diagnosis, clear, without exaggeration. The grandchildren didn't come right away. At first, they were afraid, and I don't justify that. But each concession was a small stone in the foundation that could still be rebuilt. But not everything fell into place. That's not the point. I didn't dream of applause or a celebration in my honor. I realized that respect is not something that can be forced mechanically. Respect is a choice that is made every time you look another person in the eye and see them as a person, not a problem or a burden. My goal was different: to make them stop and decide who they want to be, and whether they are willing to pay for their decisions. I gave them time and a reason. There were more people in society who glanced and looked away. But sometimes, under that gaze, another reaction slipped by, a brief, barely noticeable one: sympathy, a hasty, "Should I help?" from a person who would have walked past before. Not grand saving gestures, no. Small, but significant. It was these small changes that I wanted to see, not humiliating others for the sake of my own enrichment, but caring as a habit. I do not feel like a winner. Victory is a word for the battlefield, for young people who count points. My victory is that I forced the system to think. I sowed doubt in those who were accustomed to being guided by the instinct of easy alienation. And sometimes doubt is the beginning of conscience. I taught them to look in the mirror, and if the truth appeared there, it was no longer my merit, it was their choice whether to accept this truth. They think that revenge corrodes the soul. Perhaps once it was. But my revenge was not about gloomy bitterness in the heart, but about order. I wanted the world to understand: old age is not a sentence to invisibility. Old age is another form of presence. And if you take away a person's dignity, don't be surprised when they learn to take it back, with the means they have. I look at myself in the window in the evenings. My face is different now than in the photo from that golden age. But my gaze is the same as it was, only now it is wiser and colder. I don't look for pity. I prefer silence with respect. Silence that is not emptiness, but weighs like metal, courageous, confident. When the children come, they look not with contempt, but with a little more attention. The neighbors smile a little more sincerely. The pharmacist asks how they are in a different tone. It's not an ideal relationship, but it's no longer betrayal. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I had simply broken down on those days on the street when teenagers laughed at my things. If I had shouted, or fallen into a chaotic rage. Perhaps then a lot would have happened differently. But I am glad that I went the other way. Because there are different lessons of revenge, and I chose the one that gives people the opportunity to learn. Harsh, without a wrapper. But with a chance to understand. When the evening light comes on in my room, I often look at those old documents, photos, and letters. They no longer evoke pride or pain as they used to. They are like a map of the path traveled. I keep them because they are me. And I have learned to live with the fact that people can change, not always beautifully and not always quickly. But sometimes one reflection, one moment of insight is enough for everything to start moving in the other direction. I have not learned to forgive with complete ease. This is a word for weakness, when there is no strength to keep your distance. I have learned to let go, sometimes out of coldness, sometimes out of understanding that life is short, and lessons are long. Respect for old age is not a request, it is a requirement of basic human dignity. And if the world doesn't want to learn differently, let it at least remember, those it has written off into the shadows may return not with the flash of a sword, but with a silence that cuts the air deeper than a voice. I remain who I was, a man with a memory, a man with plans and weaknesses. But now also a man who knows how to get noticed. And when someone again deems me unnecessary when the evening light comes on in my room, I often look at those old documents, photos, and letters. They no longer evoke the pride or pain they once did. They are like a map of the path I have traveled. I hold them because they are me. And I have learned to live with the fact that people can change, not always beautifully and not always quickly. But sometimes, one reflection, one moment of insight, is enough for everything to start moving in the other direction. I have not learned to forgive with complete ease. It is a word for weakness, when there is no strength to keep your distance. I have learned to let go, sometimes out of coldness, sometimes out of understanding that life is short and lessons are long. Respect for old age is not a request, it is a demand of basic human dignity. And if the world does not want to learn differently, let it at least remember, those whom it has written off into the shadows may return not with the flash of a sword, but with a silence that cuts the air deeper than a voice. I remain what I was, a person with a memory, a person with plans and weaknesses. But now also a person who knows how to get noticed. And when someone considers me unnecessary again when the evening light comes on in my room, I often look at those old documents, photos, and letters. They no longer evoke the pride or pain they once did. They are like a map of the path I have traveled. I hold them because they are me. And I have learned to live with the fact that people can change, not always beautifully and not always quickly. But sometimes, one reflection, one moment of insight, is enough for everything to start moving in the other direction. I have not learned to forgive with complete ease. It is a word for weakness, when there is no strength to keep your distance. I have learned to let go, sometimes out of coldness, sometimes out of understanding that life is short and lessons are long. Respect for old age is not a request, it is a demand of basic human dignity. And if the world does not want to learn differently, let it at least remember, those whom it has written off into the shadows may return not with the flash of a sword, but with a silence that cuts the air deeper than a voice. I remain what I was, a person with a memory, a person with plans and weaknesses. But now also a person who knows how to get noticed. And when someone considers me unnecessary again, let him remember the mirror. Because it is able to show the truth, not always pleasant, but necessary.
Subscribe and like. And tell your friends about this video.